Hello, my name is Hope Caldwell, and the first time I walked into that office, my own sister pointed at me and said, "She's probably here to apply for a job." They laughed, because of my shoes, my silence, my second-hand coat. But I didn't laugh. I waited. I watched. And when the senior partner came out and called my name, Hope Caldwell, co-founder, my sister's smile cracked like glass. They thought I was nobody. They forgot who built everything they now claim. So tell me, what happens when the woman they erased comes back to rewrite the story? The morning sun in San Francisco always carries a kind of glare that feels judgmental. It was one of those crisp weekdays when downtown buzzed with men in tailored suits and women walking fast in heels that clicked like punctuation marks. I parked my old gray Honda a few blocks away from the firm, Caldwell and Avery, and sat there for a moment, staring at my reflection in the rearview mirror. No makeup, a faded denim jacket, sneakers that had seen better years. I could almost hear my sister's voice already. "Hope, could you at least try to look professional?" I didn't care. At least that's what I told myself. The paperwork in the passenger seat was what I came for, documents Seraphine had forgotten for some client meeting. I'd agreed to drop them off because that's what I always did. The dependable little sister. The one who showed up when everyone else was too busy being important. I tucked my hair behind my ear, took a breath, and stepped out into the wind. The building loomed over me, glass and steel, spotless. Inside, the lobby gleamed with marble floors and the quiet hum of productivity. The receptionist, a young woman with perfect posture and perfect eyeliner, smiled politely when I approached. "Hi," I said, adjusting the folder in my hand. "I'm here to drop something off for Seraphine Caldwell." Her eyes flickered with recognition, or maybe curiosity. "You're her assistant?" I smiled faintly. "No. Her sister." The words felt small as soon as they left my mouth. She looked startled, murmured something polite, and gestured toward the seating area. I sat down, crossing one leg over the other, trying not to look like someone waiting for validation. Around me, people in suits scrolled through emails, their coffee cups steaming. I caught sight of my reflection in the glass wall, jeans, sneakers, a face that didn't belong here. That feeling wasn't new. It had been following me since childhood, every Christmas dinner, every birthday where Seraphine's name was mentioned first. She'd been the golden one, the achiever, the voice of the family's pride. I was the creative one, which was another way of saying the unreliable one. The elevator dinged. Seraphine stepped out, surrounded by two coworkers. Her hair was glossy, her dress sharp, her confidence curated. The kind of woman people notice without her needing to say a word. And then she saw me. For half a second, her face softened, then she smiled that brittle, public smile she always wore in front of others. "Oh," she said, loud enough for the lobby to hear. "She's probably here to apply for a job." Laughter broke out, sharp and immediate. One of her coworkers, some guy with an expensive haircut, grinned at me like I was a walking punchline. I felt the heat rise in my chest, the sting behind my eyes. But I didn't react. Not anymore. I'd learned long ago that reacting only made me the problem. I stood up, keeping my voice even. "You forgot your client files." She took them, her manicured fingers brushing the edge of the folder as if she didn't want to touch something that belonged to me. "You could have left them with the front desk," she said, her tone light but cutting. "I wanted to make sure they got to you," I replied, my smile barely there. Her coworker whispered something. She laughed again, louder this time. The receptionist looked down, pretending to adjust something on her computer. The sound of their amusement echoed in the marble space until it felt like a physical weight pressing on my shoulders. I thought about the Christmas dinner 2 years ago, when Seraphine had raised her glass and told everyone that my little freelance projects were adorable. Dad had laughed. Mom had smiled awkwardly. And I'd said nothing, just like now. That silence wasn't surrender. It was armor. Thanks for running the errand, she said, turning away. Errand. That word hit harder than I expected. She walked toward the elevators again, the others trailing behind her like satellites orbiting the sun. I stayed where I was, watching the back of her head, wondering how long I'd keep letting her treat me like a favor she regretted asking for. Then, suddenly, something shifted. The air in the lobby changed. The elevator doors opened again, this time revealing a woman everyone seemed to recognize. The senior partner, Margaret Lowell. She was older, commanding, the kind of person who carried silence like authority. Her eyes swept across the lobby before landing on me. And she smiled. Hope, she said warmly, walking toward me. I didn't know you were stopping by. Every head turned. Even Seraphine froze mid-step. I blinked. Hi, Margaret, I said, my voice soft but steady. She extended a hand. It's been too long. Are you staying for the partners' briefing? The receptionist's jaw dropped. One of Seraphine's coworkers nearly choked on his coffee. Seraphine's smile faltered, her confusion visible in the tightening of her jaw. You know each other? She asked carefully. Margaret laughed gently. Know her. Hope used to consult with us on the Williamson case years ago. She's brilliant. Silence fell over the lobby like glass shattering. I felt my sister's eyes on me, wide, calculating. For once, she didn't have a script ready. Margaret squeezed my arm lightly. Come by my office later, dear. I'd love to catch up. I nodded, my throat dry. I will. Thank you. And just like that, she was gone, back into the elevator, back into her world of power and polished surfaces. I turned to Seraphine. Her expression was a mix of disbelief and something else, fear, maybe. Well, I said quietly, looks like I won't need to apply for that job after all. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. I left before she could find one. Outside, the city hummed as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But inside me, something small and dormant began to stir. Maybe it wasn't anger. Maybe it was clarity. For years, I'd played the quiet sister, the one who stayed out of the spotlight, who kept the peace, who showed up and cleaned up after everyone else's mess. But as I stepped back into the sunlight, I realized something simple and terrifying. I wasn't the errand girl anymore. I was the woman they'd underestimated for far too long. Her laugh vanished before she could fake another word, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel small. The silence that followed stretched across the lobby, thick enough to make even the air conditioning hum seem too loud. I stood there, still holding the empty folder that no longer felt like a burden, when I saw Geneva Walsh, one of the firm's senior partners, stride across the polished floor. It had been years, but I'd know that confident walk anywhere. Geneva was a woman who didn't need to announce her presence, the click of her heels did that for her. She stopped right in front of me, her eyes lighting up with recognition, and before I could even process it, she smiled, a real one, not the kind people put on for photos. Hope. My goodness, it's been far too long, she said, pulling me into a brief hug. You look wonderful. If the marble floor had cracked open beneath Seraphine right then, I don't think anyone would have been surprised. Every pair of eyes in the lobby was on us. Geneva turned toward the small audience that had been busy laughing at me moments earlier. Her voice carried authority without needing volume. Everyone, she said clearly, this is Hope Caldwell, the co-architect of our firm's foundational model. If not for her, half the systems we use today wouldn't even exist. For a moment, it was as if time forgot how to move. The receptionist's mouth fell open. One of Seraphine's coworkers dropped his pen. Even the guy who'd smirked at my sneakers looked like he wanted to melt into the floor. Seraphine blinked, her posture stiffening. Sorry, Geneva, I didn't realize you two knew each other. Geneva glanced at her, her smile polite but sharp. Knew each other. Hope helped build this place. When we were still renting office space in Daly City, she was the one who designed our first structural framework for client management. You use her system every day, Seraphine. The words landed like cold rain. Someone near the reception desk whispered, "She works here." Geneva turned slightly, her eyes still on me but her tone firm. She helped build here. I didn't need to look at my sister to know her smile was gone. It had been replaced by something tighter, rawer, a look she usually reserved for people who had the nerve to outshine her. I felt my pulse slow down, not speed up. That surprised me. I wasn't nervous, I was calm. Too calm. Maybe because this moment wasn't about revenge. It was about truth finally stepping out of the shadows. Geneva rested a hand on my shoulder. You never told me you had family here, she said softly. I smiled just a little. Guess I didn't think it mattered. She gave me that knowing look, the one that said she understood more than she was letting on. It matters now. The lobby had become uncomfortably quiet. Seraphine's coworkers began pretending to check their phones, anything to avoid eye contact. I noticed how her expression kept shifting between confusion and calculation, as if she was already rewriting the story in her head. Well, she said finally, forcing a laugh that cracked at the edges, I had no idea you'd work together. I mean, I knew Hope did some consulting years back. Geneva didn't let her finish. Consulting? No, dear. She led. I learned from her. There it was. The sound of glass breaking without a single shard hitting the ground. Seraphine's mouth tightened into something that might have been a smile if it weren't so brittle. Right, she murmured. That's impressive. I could see her coworkers' faces shifting as they reevaluated everything they thought they knew. One of them, the same guy who'd mocked me earlier, actually muttered, I didn't realize you were that Hope. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Geneva checked her watch. I'm late for a meeting, but you should come by my office before you leave, she said warmly. We've got some catching up to do. She started toward the elevator, pausing just long enough to glance back. Oh, and Hope, don't let anyone here forget what you've built. The firm wouldn't be standing without you. When the doors closed behind her, the lobby seemed smaller, heavier. Seraphine stood frozen, her coworkers scattering like birds after a gunshot. The receptionist coughed softly and busied herself with paperwork that didn't exist. I could almost taste the tension in the air. It was sharp, metallic. My sister turned toward me, her voice low but cutting. Why didn't you ever mention this? I tilted my head. Would it have made a difference? She swallowed, but her pride was stronger than her shame. You love catching me off guard, don't you? I don't have to, I said. You hand me the opportunities. She blinked, caught between anger and embarrassment. Don't start something you can't finish, Hope. I smiled faintly. You mean like you did with my career 5 years ago? That got her. Her expression flickered, her confidence cracking for just a heartbeat. I turned to leave, but her voice followed me. You always play the victim. I stopped at the glass doors, sunlight spilling over my reflection. No, I said quietly, I just learned how to survive your version of family. I stepped outside. The city was still loud, indifferent, but my footsteps felt lighter. The sharpness in my chest softened into something steadier. As I walked toward the parking lot, a memory surfaced, Geneva and I sitting at a cramped table years ago, surrounded by takeout boxes and legal drafts. I'd just been fired from a smaller firm after my proposal mysteriously leaked to a competitor. Back then, I hadn't known Seraphine had been the one to send it. "Don't let them steal your silence," Geneva had told me that night. "Quiet people make the loudest impact when the truth finally catches up." She'd offered me a chance to rebuild, to work behind the scenes, to create something solid and enduring while the world wasn't watching. That project became the backbone of what her firm used today. And my sister. She'd spent all that time pretending the foundation she stood on wasn't mine. The irony was almost poetic. Back in the present, I reached my car, unlocked it, and sat inside. My phone buzzed, a text from Seraphine. "We need to talk. Soon." I stared at the screen for a long moment before turning the phone face down. There would be time for that. But not now. For now, I wanted to breathe. I started the engine, watching the reflection of the firm's logo fade in my rearview mirror as I pulled away. Somewhere behind those glass walls, my sister was probably rewriting the story already, trying to turn today into a misunderstanding she could explain away. But some things didn't need explaining. They needed remembering. That moment in the lobby wasn't just an accident, it was the truth walking out into daylight after years of being buried. And deep down, I knew something: this wasn't the last time the past would come knocking. But that moment in the lobby, that was only the beginning. The city was still buzzing outside when Geneva's assistant caught up with me in the lobby. "Ms. Walsh would like to see you upstairs, Miss Caldwell." Her tone was polite, careful, like she wasn't sure whether I belonged here or outranked half the people she'd just watched squirm. I hesitated, the folder still warm in my hand from where Seraphine had grabbed it earlier. I thought about leaving, driving away, letting the moment stand as it was. But curiosity, or maybe something deeper, pulled me back. "All right," I said quietly. "Lead the way." The elevator ride was silent except for the hum of cables. I watched the city drop away beneath the glass walls as we climbed to the 32nd floor. When the doors opened, the carpet swallowed the sound of my steps. Geneva's office suite was familiar but not unchanged. She'd always preferred light wood and warm tones, but now there were framed photos of her grandchildren and awards along the wall that I hadn't seen before. She was waiting in the meeting room adjoining her office, seated at the long glass table. When she saw me, she stood and gestured toward the chair opposite hers. "I hope you don't mind me pulling you up for a few minutes," she said. "It's been far too long, Hope." I smiled faintly. "I didn't expect to run into you today. Or any of this, really." Geneva let out a low chuckle, the kind that came from someone who'd seen too much to be surprised by life anymore. "Neither did I. But I'm glad I did. Sit, please." I took a seat, placing my bag beside me. For a moment, we just looked at each other, the quiet stretched, not uncomfortable, just full of the things we hadn't said for years. "You know," she began, "I always wished you'd stayed with us." Her words caught me off guard. "Stayed?" She nodded, folding her hands. "Yes. Back when we were expanding, after the Williamson project. We wanted to bring you on full-time. I even told the board that I considered you essential." But she hesitated, her expression shifting. "Seraphine came to me privately. She said you were considering leaving the city. That you weren't focused enough for long-term work." The air left my lungs in a slow, deliberate breath. "She said that?" Geneva's eyes softened with regret. "I'm afraid so. She made it sound like she was protecting you from overextending yourself." I believed her. There it was, another small betrayal folded neatly into the past. I'd always wondered why that offer never materialized. I thought maybe I hadn't been good enough, maybe they'd moved on without me. But the truth was simpler, crueler. Seraphine had made sure the door closed before I even knew it was open. I forced a calm smile. That sounds like her, I said, my tone even. She's talented, Geneva admitted carefully, but sometimes she's selective with her loyalty. Selective. That was one way to describe it. I looked toward the window, watching the sunlight play across the skyline. She's always been good at convincing people she knows what's best for everyone. Geneva exhaled, as if releasing something she'd been holding for too long. I should have checked with you directly. That's on me. I shook my head. It's not your fault. I should have seen it sooner. For a few moments, silence filled the space again, thick with understanding. Then Geneva rose and crossed to the credenza near the window. She opened a drawer, shuffled through a few folders, and returned with a slightly yellowed envelope. There's something else, she said, placing it in front of me. My name was written on it, in her neat, looping handwriting. Hope Caldwell, National Legal Innovation Board recommendation. My breath caught. What is this? It's a recommendation letter I wrote for you years ago, Geneva said softly. Remember when you applied for that national position? I gave the letter to Seraphine to deliver, since she said she was helping you with your application. The room tilted a little as her words sank in. I tore the envelope open carefully, my fingers trembling despite my effort to stay composed. The paper inside was crisp but aged. Geneva's familiar tone filled the page, praise, respect, gratitude. She'd written about my integrity, my creativity, the way I approached law as both science and empathy. The kind of letter that could have changed everything. But I'd never received it. I remembered that time vividly, how I'd waited weeks after submitting my application, how the rejection email had come without explanation. I'd convinced myself I wasn't qualified, that maybe they'd chosen someone more experienced. Now I knew. She told me they went with another candidate, I said, my voice quiet, almost detached. Geneva looked down, regret shadowing her expression. I assumed you'd at least gotten the letter. I had no idea. I set the paper back on the table, my hand steady again. She never sent it. She must have intercepted it. That's a serious accusation, Geneva said cautiously. It's not an accusation, I replied. It's a pattern. I leaned back, feeling that old ache resurface, not the kind that made you cry, but the kind that made you stronger in silence. For as long as I could remember, Seraphine had been rewriting my story. When I got a small grant for my first independent project, she told our parents it was charity. When I started consulting for smaller firms, she called it volunteer work. Every time I tried to stand on my own, she shifted the narrative until I sounded like someone who couldn't stand at all. And the worst part? They believed her. I'd told myself it didn't matter, that I was fine without their approval. But sitting there, holding that letter, I realized how much I'd lost because of her need to always be the brightest light in the room. Geneva broke the silence. You don't deserve what she did. But you also don't deserve to carry it alone. Her words softened something in me. I nodded slowly. Thank you, Geneva. I mean it, she said. You're brilliant, Hope. Don't let her make you forget that. I tucked the letter into my bag carefully, as if it might dissolve if I wasn't gentle. We talked for a while longer, about the firm, about old cases, about how different the world felt now compared to when we first started. And then, when it was time to leave, Geneva said quietly, I'm proud of you. Even if I didn't get to say it back then. I smiled. Better late than never. Downstairs, the day had shifted. The late afternoon light filtered through the tall glass windows, washing everything in gold. As I crossed the lobby again, Seraphine was nowhere to be seen. Probably hiding in her office, rewriting history one more time. The letter in my bag felt heavier than paper, it felt like proof. Proof that I hadn't imagined the years of subtle sabotage. Proof that my instincts had been right all along. As I stepped out onto the street, the memory of another dinner flashed across my mind, one from years ago, back when things still looked normal on the surface. We'd been at our parents' house, the table covered in the kind of food that meant celebration. I just told them I was being considered for a national board position. I remember the pride bubbling up as I spoke, the rare excitement I allowed myself to show. Mom had smiled politely. Dad had poured more wine. And Seraphine, sitting across from me in her designer dress, had leaned back and said, "That's sweet, Hope. It's nice to dream big." Everyone laughed lightly, thinking she was teasing. But I'd felt the sting. I saw the way her eyes glimmered, not with affection, but with something colder. Later that night, when I tried to show Mom the draft of my application, she'd waved it off. "You should let your sister review it first," she'd said. "She understands these things better." So I did. And now I knew what she'd done with that trust. The wind picked up as I reached my car. I sat for a moment, staring at the skyline, at all the windows reflecting the setting sun. For years, I'd mistaken my silence for strength. I thought keeping the peace was the same as keeping my dignity. But peace without truth was just another form of surrender. I reached into my bag and pulled out the letter again, tracing my name on the envelope. Geneva's words echoed in my mind, "Don't let her make you forget who you are." For the first time in years, I believed I wouldn't. And then, she said the one thing that broke whatever was left of my restraint. The words from Geneva were still echoing in my head as I packed the letter into my bag. I stood by the window, trying to steady my breath, staring at the city below. It was late afternoon now, the skyline had softened under the gold of a fading sun. I was ready to leave, ready to get out before I ran into Seraphine again. But life never waits for you to be ready. The door swung open without a knock. Seraphine walked in, her heels clicking like accusations on the polished floor. Her expression was a careful mask of concern, the kind she used at family gatherings when she wanted to look like the reasonable one. "Oh," she said lightly, "I didn't realize you were still here. Geneva said she wanted to catch up with you. I didn't mean to intrude." Her tone was sugar-dipped, but her eyes were sharp. Before I could respond, Geneva rose from her chair, her professionalism unfaltering. "No intrusion at all," she said, gathering her notes. "I was just about to step into another meeting." She gave me a meaningful look, the kind that said be careful, but be brave. And then she left, closing the door behind her with a soft click that somehow felt final. The silence that followed was almost tangible. Seraphine crossed her arms, leaning casually against the table, her mask slipping the second Geneva was gone. "You must really enjoy surprising people, don't you?" she said. "First the lobby, now this." I turned to face her fully. "You mean existing in the same building as you?" Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Don't get clever, Hope. You think showing up here and having a little reunion with Geneva changes anything? It doesn't. You don't belong in this firm, and you never will." There it was, the venom under the charm. "You're not going to slither your way into this place," she continued, her tone dropping, colder now. "You had your chance years ago, and you blew it. Don't embarrass yourself by trying again. It would have hurt once. But not now. Not after everything I'd learned." I met her gaze, calm and deliberate. "It's not your decision who belongs here." She let out a soft laugh, shaking her head. "You really believe that? This is my world, Hope. I've worked my way into it. You can't just walk back in after years of playing freelancer and expect anyone to take you seriously." "Funny," I said. "That's what you told Geneva years ago when she wanted to hire me full-time." For a brief moment, her confidence faltered, just enough for me to see the truth flicker behind her composure. "Excuse me." "She told me everything," I said quietly. "How you convinced her I wasn't focused enough, that I was planning to leave town. How you made sure the offer never reached me." Her jaw tightened, but she didn't deny it. "You were always distracted. Always chasing ideas instead of results." I just told her the truth. "No," I replied, my voice steady. "You told her the version of the truth that kept me out of your way." Seraphine's lips curved in something that might have been a smile if it hadn't carried so much disdain. "You know what your problem is. You think everyone's out to get you. Maybe if you'd worked harder instead of wallowing in your own sensitivity, you'd have made something of yourself." I felt something in me shift, not anger exactly, but clarity. "I worked in silence," I said. "You climbed by stepping on people." Her eyes narrowed. "Don't pretend you're some victim of my ambition. You had your choices. You just didn't fight hard enough." "I didn't fight dirty," I corrected. She rolled her eyes. "Oh, please. Life isn't some morality test. You either win, or you're forgotten." I studied her face, perfect makeup, perfect posture, perfect illusion. "Is that what this is about? Being afraid to be forgotten?" She didn't answer. "Because it sure looks like you've built your whole life around making sure no one notices the cracks," I said softly. For a split second, I saw the crack, right there, in the flicker of her expression. But she caught herself quickly, straightened up, and sneered. "You're pathetic, Hope. Always trying to sound profound when everyone knows you're just jealous." "Jealous?" I repeated, my voice calm. "Of what?" "Your fear. Your lies. The version of success you have to guard like it's about to slip through your fingers." Her nostrils flared. "You'll always be beneath me. Always. That's just how it is." The words hung in the air, heavy and deliberate. I should have walked away right then. But instead, I stepped closer, closing the space between us until she had to look up slightly to meet my eyes. "If you're so sure of that," I said, "why do you sound scared?" She laughed, too quickly. "Scared? Of you?" "Yes," I said quietly. "Because I stopped letting you define me." She opened her mouth to speak, but the words didn't come. Instead, she grabbed her bag off the table, movements jerky now, defensive. "You think Geneva's your ticket back in here? She's sentimental, that's all. She won't risk her reputation for you." "I don't need her to," I replied. "The truth does that on its own." Seraphine scoffed. "You're still the sad little girl in hand-me-downs, hoping someone notices." I took a slow breath, letting her words settle, and then dissolve. "And you're still the girl who can't stand when someone finally does." For the first time, she looked away. Not out of arrogance, but avoidance. She adjusted her jacket, turned toward the door, and said under her breath, "Stay away from my firm. Stay away from my life." I didn't follow her. I didn't even move. I just let the sound of the door closing echo through the room until it faded into the hum of the air vent above me. The letter in my bag suddenly felt like an anchor and a weapon at once. I realized then that this wasn't about the firm anymore, it was about years of manipulation disguised as sisterly concern. I walked over to the window again, staring out at the streets below. Cars moved like slow veins of light through the city. My reflection in the glass looked back at me, steady, older, unshaken. I'd spent years letting her shape who I was allowed to be. The obedient little sister. The family afterthought. The woman who didn't speak up because it kept the peace. But peace built on silence isn't peace, it's control. That day, I didn't walk out of that room defeated. I walked out ready. I left the room with the letter tucked deep in my bag, the days shifting into evening as I rode down in the elevator. I watched the lobby fade behind the glass doors as I stepped onto the sidewalk, the city lights beginning their quiet takeover of the dusk. I didn't rush to my car. Instead, I walked across the pavement and leaned on the hood for a moment, letting the cool air settle around me. The folder felt lighter now, as though carrying it had begun to loosen something inside me. Once I reached home and set the keys down, I pulled off my blazer and let it fall onto the back of a chair. I sat down at my desk, opened the laptop, and typed archive request, internal communications 2012 to 2018, Caldwell and Avery. My fingers hovered for a second over the send button, and then I clicked. It was a small act of defiance, quiet but meaningful. The next morning, I returned to the firm's archive room. It was tucked away on the same 32nd floor but down a hallway most associates never took. Dust gathered on the shelves, and the lighting was dim. I asked the clerk for the access key, producing my badge and politely explaining what I was doing. He handed me the scanner and nodded. I walked in and pulled the door closed behind me. Row upon row of binders, boxes labeled 2014 confidential, HR records, tentative, client intake, archived, greeted me like silent witnesses. I knew exactly what I was looking for. I wanted what had been ignored, what had been shoved into the background so people wouldn't see. I started with the Founders Files box. Inside, I found the letter from Geneva, yellowed at the edges, sealed in an envelope addressed to me. I sat on the floor, pulled the letter out, and sighed. At that moment, something shifted. I then pulled a metal filing drawer labeled Partner Nominations 2015, and found my name missing entirely, though other senior associates were clearly listed. I flipped through internal memos, meeting notes, emails flagged, high priority, confidential, used for recruitment discussions. My name appeared only in margins, not in acknowledgements. One email from Human Resources in early 2016 said, Subject, Replacement Candidate for Caldwell, Hope, Proceed with Alternate. I stared at it for seconds that felt like minutes. I printed every page I touched, the printer whirring quietly behind me. By the time I left the archive, I carried 3 manila folders thick with documents. My shoulders were heavier, my resolve firmer. That afternoon, I met with Maylise Rowan, my longtime friend and tech consultant, at a small cafe a few blocks away. I handed her one of the folders. She opened it, browsed quietly, then looked up. Look at this, she said, pointing to a name on the list, Dia Morales, intern 2013, NDA terminated 2013, no reason given. Beneath that, Jennifer Chang, contractor 2014, project ended early, firm noted, performance, incomplete. Removed from database. We exchanged glances. This isn't just about us, she said. You've got a pattern here. The words hit harder than I expected. I realized the stakes were bigger than my own story. There were women whose careers had been sidelined, erased, or appropriated, all for someone else's image. I felt sorrow and anger entwined. But the anger wasn't wild. It was measured. It came with purpose. Later that evening, Geneva and I sat in her living room, her house near Lakeshore Drive, where the city lights reflected on water like floating stars. She poured 2 cups of tea and sat across from me. The folder was open on the coffee table. She studied the documents, her expression unreadable. I always had a gut feeling, she said quietly. But I never allowed myself to dig. I told myself it was business, nothing personal. I trusted that the firm knew what it was doing. I took a deep breath. This isn't for revenge, Geneva. It's for accountability. I won't be your silent sister anymore. Her eyes softened. You're doing the right thing. I'll help. Discreetly. We'll bring this to the board. But you have to be prepared. I nodded. I am. No more waiting. No more being overlooked. When I left Geneva's house that night, the wind had picked up off the lake. I walked to my car and paused to look back at the skyline, the firm's building lit up in the distance, like a fortress. I felt peaceful, but the calm felt different now. It wasn't resignation, it was readiness. I understood that secrets might be buried, but they don't stay buried. Sooner or later, they break through the surface like roots cracking concrete. But the thing about secrets, they always find a way to surface. Morning came heavy with a gray sky. The kind that made everything look washed out, even the city's brightness. I drove to the firm early, long before anyone else arrived. The garage was half empty, only a few cars scattered across the lower level. My headlights flashed across a white envelope tucked under my windshield wiper. At first, I thought it was a parking ticket. But when I tore it open, the air left my chest. Inside were printed screenshots, digital ghosts of conversations I was never meant to see. They were text exchanges between Seraphine and other partners. The first one read, "Seraphine, she's playing the victim again. Geneva's getting sentimental." Seraphine, exactly. A charity case with good PR, don't worry, she'll be gone before the gala. I stood there, my fingers cold despite the heat still radiating from the car hood. My reflection stared back from the window, tired eyes, tight mouth, the faint tremor of anger moving beneath my skin. They were laughing about me. About my life. But more than anger, there was clarity. I wasn't imagining it. The condescension, the little cuts dressed as jokes, the years of being minimized, it wasn't in my head. It was documented. I slid the papers back into the envelope and tucked it into my bag. I took one more long look at myself in the car window. No more silence, I whispered. By noon, the building buzzed with its usual weekday rhythm, coffee runs, shoe clicks, whispers of deadlines. The conference room smelled faintly of paper and burnt espresso. Geneva was already there, seated near the head of the long glass table. I took a spot near the center, deliberately across from Seraphine. She arrived fashionably late, as always. Her smile was perfectly calibrated, her hair flawless. She dropped her bag on the table with the confidence of someone who thought she owned the air in the room. "Let's begin," she said, without acknowledging me. The meeting was about internal restructuring for the upcoming fiscal year, something dry enough to keep most eyes glazed over. But when Geneva mentioned reviewing certain ethics procedures, Seraphine cut in sharply. "We shouldn't get distracted with side issues," she said. Then, turning her attention to me, "Some of us might have personal grievances, but this isn't the place to air them." It was subtle, but everyone caught it. I sat quietly for a beat, long enough for the tension to thicken. Then I pulled the envelope from my folder, laid it flat on the table, and slid one of the screenshots forward. "Is this how partners speak about each other here?" I asked. My voice wasn't loud, but it carried. The words landed like glass shattering. Every head turned. Seraphine's smile faltered as she saw the page. Color drained from her face. Geneva's eyes narrowed in quiet fury. "Where did you get that?" Seraphine demanded, her voice rising. "It doesn't matter where it came from," I said evenly. "What matters is that it exists. And it reflects the culture here, the one that people pretend doesn't exist." Her jaw tightened. "You're blowing this out of proportion, Hope. It's just banter." "Banter?" I repeated. "Calling me a charity case. Telling people I'd be gone before the gala. That's not banter. That's defamation." A few associates exchanged uneasy glances. One of the younger women shifted in her seat, her hands fidgeting with her pen. Another quietly lowered his gaze. Let's all calm down, Geneva interjected softly, though her tone left no room for dismissal. I think we need to look at what's being presented before we label anything as harmless. Seraphine turned toward her, her voice trembling slightly with forced control. You can't seriously be entertaining this. She's trying to sabotage me. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table. I don't need to sabotage you, Seraphine. You've done that yourself. To me, to others. Her eyes flicked toward the others in the room, desperate for support. But the silence that followed was more condemning than words. One of the junior associates finally spoke, hesitant. I've heard comments like that before. Not just about hope. It was like a crack splitting open the surface of something long buried. Geneva folded her hands, calm but firm. Then it sounds like this isn't an isolated problem. Seraphine looked around, realizing her control was slipping. You people have no idea what she's doing. This is manipulation. I stood. My chair scraped lightly against the floor. You're right about one thing, I said. This is manipulation, but not from me. For years, you've rewritten the story to make yourself the hero. You've taken credit for others' work, silenced anyone who challenged you, and smiled while doing it. Her face hardened. You're not going to ruin what I've built. I'm not trying to ruin it, I said. I'm just showing what's underneath it. And that was when it happened. Geneva spoke, her voice like steel wrapped in silk. Seraphine, I think it's best you step out for the remainder of this meeting. The silence that followed was heavy. Seraphine opened her mouth to protest, but Geneva didn't look up again. When the door shut behind her, the room exhaled collectively. I stayed standing, my heartbeat steady but my hands still cold. After a long pause, I said, I'm requesting a formal review of conduct, mine, hers, anyone's who's been affected. I'm not doing this for revenge. I'm doing it so no one else has to feel invisible in a place they helped build. The room was still, but something in the atmosphere shifted. Geneva nodded slowly, the quiet approval of someone who'd waited years for the truth to surface. We'll initiate a confidential inquiry, she said. I'll oversee it myself. Some people still avoided eye contact, not ready to pick sides. But a few, especially the younger staff, looked directly at me. There was something new in their eyes. Respect. Relief. Recognition. I gathered my papers, sliding them neatly back into my folder. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I just breathed. As I walked out of the conference room, the hallway lights flickered briefly, a glitch, or maybe a sign. The kind of small interruption that reminds you the world keeps moving, even when everything feels suspended. In the elevator, I caught my reflection again. Same eyes. Same woman. But something was different. The silence that once felt like armor had turned into clarity. Retaliation is predictable. But the truth. That's what they never see coming. I stepped out of the elevator that evening feeling a quiet tremor beneath my composure. The corporate lobby light seemed harsher, colder, as if they sensed what was coming. I had reviewed the printed emails in my car's passenger seat on the way over, the envelope tucked beside me like a sleeping storm. I knew the board meeting earlier had shifted something. I knew the game was changing. Now, as I logged into my home office computer just after the garage door closed behind me, the screen displayed the firm's homepage, Caldwell and Avery, the names of the founding partners spelled out nice and bold. Except there was a hole. My name was gone. Co-founder, Seraphine Caldwell and Callum Hastings. No mention of Hope Caldwell. No biography, no photo, no credit. Just blank space where I used to be. My email access was locked too. Attempts to log in bounced back with access revoked. My first reaction wasn't panic. It was a strange stillness, like walking through deep water. I closed my laptop and leaned into the chair, frowning at the shredded reflection of myself in the dark window behind the desk. They erased me. This wasn't an accident, a glitch, or a clerical oversight. This was a message. Geneva's call came less than 5 minutes later. Hope, I'm trying to figure this out. They're saying it's a database glitch. No one's returning my calls at the moment. I kept the line open a moment longer. Thanks, Geneva, I said quietly. I'll try to sort what I can. After I hung up, I pulled the envelope from the folder on the desk. The corners were curling. I turned it over slowly and unsealed it. The cold click of the latch echoed in the silent room. I slid out the papers, the screenshots I had dropped in the meeting, the recommendation letter Geneva had secretly kept, the sign-in logs and HR memos I'd uncovered. I gathered them and stacked them deliberately in front of me. At 7:32 p.m., I sent a secure message to one of the junior associates, meet me in my office at 9 a.m. tomorrow. Come prepared. Then I shut my laptop, turned off the desk lamp, and walked into the kitchen to pour myself a glass of water. In the reflection of the kitchen window I saw a woman who looked tired, but not defeated. I raised the glass. Here's to you, I whispered. And the truth you almost stole from me. The next evening, long before the official start of the firm's annual fundraising gala, I stood in the darkened driver's door, watching the valet guide cars into the glittering entrance. The gala dress code was black tie, and while others changed in hotel suites, I arrived already suited in a charcoal blazer and wide-legged trousers, elegant, understated, but emphatically present. My hair down, no flashy accessories, just a single silver locket inherited from my grandmother. Inside the ballroom, the chandeliers reflected like distant galaxies. The crowd mingled, cocktails clinked, cameras flashed. On stage, Seraphine stood behind the podium, giving her speech about legacy, leadership, and the next chapter of Caldwell and Avery. Her voice projected calm, confidence, control. She didn't see me yet. I entered quietly, stayed near the back, watching the scene unfold. When her speech finished, the audience applauded. I waited for the applause to fade, then I stepped forward. My shoes made a soft echo on the marble floor. I approached the podium and took the microphone. Since I no longer exist here, I said, voice steady, I figured I'd introduce myself. Hope Caldwell, co-founder. Erased, but not forgotten. Gasps circled the room like whispers of wind. Heads turned. Utter silence filled the space. I slid the envelope across the podium to the managing board chair and said, I've brought something you might want to review. My fingers traced the edge of the documents inside. Seraphine's expression flickered, shock. Anger. Shame. All in rapid succession. She opened her mouth, then closed it. The chair opened the envelope and looked at a printed screenshot, the same one I'd shown at the meeting, then at the stack of documents, then back at me. A junior associate caught my eye from across the room. His nod was discreet but strong. The ripple of realization started there. I left the stage, walked straight off the ballroom floor into the foyer. The crowd parted for me as I moved, confused faces parting like water before a swimmer. I didn't hear the applause. I didn't try to catch anyone's eye. I felt only the pulse of what had happened. The breakdown of illusion. The alliance shifting. I felt clarity, not triumph outside in the cold night air. The valet handed me my car. I stayed inside for a moment, my breath forming a faint cloud near the windshield. I leaned forward and sent one quick message to Geneva, it's time. Inside the gala, Seraphine exited the stage forcefully. She glanced toward me as I walked away, those same old competitive eyes glaring like someone who thought the world owed her fear. She had prided herself on being untouchable. Tonight she wasn't. The junior staff were whispering, looking at her differently. I watched from the curb, the building behind me alive with light, the sound of laughter and music drifting outward. I started the car, pulled away slowly, watching that river of glass and steel fade behind me. I realized the stage, the speech, the envelopes, they weren't the final act. They were the first public mark of what was coming. They were the moment when the foundation shook, when the firm's carefully built facade showed its first crack. In my rearview mirror, I saw a lone figure leaning against the balcony rail, Seraphine in silhouette. She looked small, framed by the lights she once commanded. The face she turned toward me carried that same challenge, stay out of my life. I didn't respond. Because I knew, this wasn't about staying out. It was about stepping in. They erased me from the firm. So I carved myself into the story they were trying to steal. The morning after the gala arrived gray and heavy, the kind of dawn that feels like a warning. My phone buzzed non-stop on the nightstand before the alarm could even go off. I ignored the first few calls, then finally answered when Geneva's name lit up on the screen. "They're panicking," she said without preamble. Her voice was clipped but vibrating with energy. "Two junior partners reached out to me this morning. They want to talk. One of them says they have records, emails, timestamps, even notes from meetings. Hope, you've started something." I sat up, rubbing the ache behind my eyes. Started something or finished it? Geneva exhaled, then said, "That depends on how brave we decide to be today." An hour later, I was sitting across from her in a quiet office that smelled faintly of coffee and printer ink. The blinds were drawn halfway, and a stack of legal pads sat between us. The air hummed with that strange stillness right before something breaks. She slid a folder toward me. "They're willing to sign statements," she said. "And I've already drafted your formal complaint. It's strong. Defamation, retaliation, unlawful removal of founder status, you have precedent. With this backing, the board won't have a leg to stand on." I ran my fingers over the folder's edge. "This isn't just about me, Geneva. This is about every woman they've erased because she didn't play their game." Her smile was small but resolute. "Then let's make it about all of them." Twist S11 landed right there, in that sterile little office, between two women who refused to stay quiet any longer. By noon, the complaint was filed. Official. Recorded. Irreversible. The summons went out before sunset. A mandatory partners session scheduled for the following morning. Geneva sent me the time and location, though technically, I wasn't on the distribution list anymore. I arrived early. Not to make a scene this time, but to witness. The boardroom was colder than I remembered. Floor-to-ceiling glass offered a panoramic view of the city, glittering in the mid-morning light. At the long polished table sat every major partner, eyes darting between each other. Geneva was there too, standing near the end of the table, poised but stern. The managing chair, a man named Avery Lang, cleared his throat and began. "Before we start, I'd like to address a significant oversight. Effective immediately, Hope Caldwell's founder status has been reinstated. The board acknowledges her foundational role in the firm's establishment and strategic framework." Murmurs rippled across the room. Seraphine, sitting 3 seats from the end, stiffened visibly. Her hands clenched together so tightly her knuckles blanched. Avery continued. "Additionally, recent findings indicate unauthorized use of firm resources to remove archived records, alter official databases, and distribute defamatory correspondence." His tone sharpened. "We've traced the source." Seraphine's head snapped up. "You can't be serious." "Please don't interrupt," he said quietly, but the warning carried weight. She looked around the room, seeking an ally. There were none. Seraphine Caldwell, he said, reading from a printed statement, effective today, you are relieved of your partnership responsibilities and placed on immediate suspension pending further investigation. The room fell silent. You could hear the hum of the air conditioner, the distant city noise below. For once, she didn't speak. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came. Geneva avoided her gaze. I watched the moment unfold with no satisfaction, just stillness. It wasn't victory, it was gravity. The natural weight of truth finally settling where it belonged. When they asked if I wanted to make a statement, I stood and said simply, I don't want revenge. I want peace. And I hope she finds some, too, with the version of herself that needed to destroy others just to feel powerful. No one breathed. Then, slowly, the chair nodded. Duly noted. Seraphine rose, shoulders stiff, and left the room without looking back. The door clicked shut behind her. It was the softest sound I'd ever heard, and somehow, the loudest. By late afternoon, I was home again. The house was quiet, sunlight spilling through the kitchen window in slanted gold lines. I sat at my desk, opened my laptop, and navigated to the firm's website out of habit. My photo was back. Not new. The same one from years ago, the candid shot Geneva had insisted on during our first expansion project. My name, my title, my story, all restored. The difference was, this time, no one could take it again. A notification popped up, one new email. It was from a young associate I'd barely spoken to. The subject line read, "Thank you." I opened it. You saved me without ever knowing me. When I saw what you did, I realized I didn't have to keep pretending. I resign today. I'll find my own path. Thank you for showing me what strength looks like. I stared at the words until they blurred, my throat tightening. Then I opened my leather-bound journal, the same one I'd been writing in since the first day I joined the firm. On a fresh page, I wrote just one line. Survival is not silence, it's strategy. I closed the book and leaned back, the tension easing from my shoulders. The sky outside had turned from gold to indigo, the kind of color that makes you think of peace after war. I thought about the years of swallowing words, of shrinking to make others comfortable, of convincing myself that endurance was enough. But it was never enough. They tried to erase me. They tried to rewrite my story. But what they never understood was that I was the story. I had built the ground they were standing on. And now, finally, the world knew it. They tried to bury me. But I was never underground. I was the foundation. The sunlight felt softer that afternoon, gentler in the sort of way that makes your heart ache just a little. I sat in the quiet cafe in Chicago, waiting. 2 weeks had passed since the board meeting, since the verdict, the reinstatement, and the subtle applause of the young associates. But nothing had finally changed at home. My phone had gone silent, the car ride over was slow, thoughtful. I ordered black coffee, even though I always preferred almond milk now, and watched the steam swirl as I thought about what was next. Eloan arrived late, her coat draped over her arm, cheeks flushed from the cold, her eyes avoiding mine at first. She sat across from me, fingers twisting around the handle of her mug. There was a long pause, filled with things we should have said years ago but didn't. I'm sorry, she said finally, voice quiet. Why didn't you tell me any of it? I stared at the table, feeling the familiar tug of hurt and the new weight of my clarity. Because I wanted to be your sister, I answered, my tone soft. Not your competition. Her shoulders sagged. I could see the guilt gathering in her eyes. You always looked like you were fine with less. I thought you liked being the nice, quiet one. I shook my head. I wasn't fine. I just didn't think anyone was listening. She swallowed hard. I was embarrassed. I was scared. I told myself you had failed because if you hadn't, what did that say about me? The words hit me like a wave. I grasped the cup in my hands, fingers warming around it. We were raised to believe only one of us could win, I said gently. But I never wanted to beat you. Her tear slipped down her cheek, and she stood up, moving closer across the table. She sounded fragile. I didn't mean to mock you. I was scared you'd outshine me. Outshine me? I tilted my head. You already loved me less when I had nothing. That's what hurt. She closed her eyes and shook her head. I know. And then the hurt in her voice, something raw and true, cracked me open. It felt like years of quiet were suddenly breathing in the open air. We stayed for nearly an hour longer, talking about our childhood, about Mom's expectations, Dad's silent sighs, the dinners where I sat quietly as she took up space, the nights I spent at my desk rewriting my story in a city that didn't even know my name. She told me about how she felt when Dad praised me quietly behind her back, how she blamed me for his shifting attention. And I told her how I felt invisible, how I told myself, I'm strong, so many times that the words stopped meaning anything. After lunch, I walked her to the coat rack in the small foyer. The wind outside was brisk as we stepped into the street together. She reached for my arm. When you're ready, she whispered, I'd like us to try again. I nodded, the amber city lights flickering on as dusk approached. I'll be here. Later that evening, I returned to my home office. The city skyline glowed through the tall windows, the firm's tower a distant silhouette of what had to change. My laptop pinged, Geneva's email. Subject line, opportunity. I clicked open the message. One of the whistleblowers wants to work directly under you. You've inspired them. My chest tightened. I stared at the words as if they were handwritten by my grandmother. My grandmother who always told me, your voice is a gift. Don't let them talk you out of using it. I pulled out the old photograph taped inside the front of my notebook, me and Aloan as kids, messy hair, awkward grins, matching summer dresses. I touched the edge of the picture softly, remembering the laughter we used to share around the kitchen table. I sent Aloan a short text, thank you for lunch. I'm here, when you're ready to try again. Then I opened my journal, the one I only write in when I want the world to hear what my voice really sounds like. I wrote one line, survival is not silence, it's strategy. I looked out at the skyline, at the lights and the promise of tomorrow. I realized in that moment why I'd fought so hard, not for justice or recognition, though they mattered, but to make sure no one else like me felt the same way I did. Invisible. Unseen. Unheard. I closed the journal, turned off the desk lamp, and let the quiet settle around me. I understood that healing doesn't mean forgetting, it means choosing how you move forward after you've been broken. I felt the ache, yes. But I also felt the rising of something else, hope. Justice was never the end. It was just the breath I needed to begin again. Sometimes, the people closest to you are the ones who bury you the deepest, under silence, under shame, under the illusion that your worth is theirs to decide. But this story reminds us, dignity isn't something they can strip away, no matter how hard they try. It's earned, reclaimed, and rebuilt in quiet moments of truth. What would you have done in Hope's place? Have you ever been underestimated by your own family? If this story moved you, hit subscribe and turn on notifications.